welcome to this webinar. The webinar, the disruptor called COVID. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Tom van Woensel. I will be your moderator, host, chair of today. And it's always interesting to see what that means, but I think it mainly means that I'm going to organize the discussions, and I try to organize discussions with our speakers today. We, of course, will also have a nice round table with the three speakers of today. I'm a professor at the Antwerp Management School, and next to that, I'm also working at the Eindhoven University of Technology. And my chair is on transport and logistics, or in the broad sense, supply chain management, if you want. Today, we are doing it in an online fashion. I think more or less everybody, after something like a year in the COVID-19 times, is more or less used to the setup of this kind of webinars. So if you have a question throughout today during the presentations, I would like you to ask to use the chat function. So type your message in the chat. I will keep my eye on the chat, and and I will give you the floor if depending on the time and depending on the type of questions. So I would like to have two types of there are two types of questions which are probably relevant to consider here. The first one is questions which are clarifications in the presentations. So of course you can put them into the chat, and if needed, I will give you the floor. And there are a number of questions which are probably also relevant in terms of which you say, hey, this would be nice to have a discussion with the three people in the round table. Then also, by all means, put it in the chat, and I will use that information in the to at least challenge our speakers of today on that. So today we have three speakers. Clearly, you probably already saw them, but we have today Anne Verhetsel, Roel Gevaerts, and Wouter de Wulf. And we will start with Wouter. Wouter is also a professor at the University of Antwerp and at the Antwerp Management School. So he's a colleague of mine as an academic director of the CMAT program. And I really regard him as a specialist in air transportation. He's been teaching in air transport, e-commerce, and all varieties of air cargo combination domain over there. And he's also, of course, a international active professor by having kind of a guest professor positions, visiting professor positions in other universities, including China, Indonesia, and so on. So I would like to now give the floor to Wouter and start share his presentation, and the floor is to you, Wouter.
Thank you so much, Professor van Woensel. Tom, thank you so much. Everyone, thanks for joining this very interesting webinar. The aim of my presentation today is to set the scene about cross-border e-commerce and to highlight a number of issues and challenges associated with the logistics. My two colleagues, Professor Gevaerts, Professor Verhetsel, will focus a bit more on the issues related to last mile and the issues related to retail real estate. I will share my screen now. The presentations will be just a second. The presentations will normally be available through so the question, the research question and the way the presentation question is cross-border e-commerce. If you look at that business model, is it moving from a disruptor to disrupted business model? And we answer that question at the end of the presentation. I will focus on a number of issues which are quite current for the moment. There are two main issues for the moment is the capacity squeeze on air cargo, and especially inter and intercontinental air cargo, and secondly, the legislative squeeze they are currently in. If we look to set the scene at the cross-border e-commerce in the world, these figures are 2020 estimated. If you look in dollar amounts, then by far the number one biggest cross-border e-commerce B2C company, because we have to narrow the scope here. It's B2C, and it is cross-border not within Europe, but between the continents, between Europe and the United States, between Europe and China. So really across the customs union. If you look in dollar amounts, then by far the number one is Amazon, the number two is eBay, and number three is the Alibaba Group, including AliExpress in there. And we've seen during the last couple of years that the top three is reinforcing their position, and surprise, you can already see that the amounts are quite high, and they are expanding. They are growing every year. Of course, they had a big boost the last year thanks to COVID, and this graph gives an overview of, you look at the different brands there, and it's not really the cross-border flows you see here, but the majority of the cross-border flows are from Europe to the US there and back, and from China there and back. You see all these brands. The brands are very often American. You see that United States is still very innovative to set up this type of product. So a lot of this type of brands like Uber Eats, it's an American brand, but of course we use it in Europe. It's not considered in the figures as cross-border. I just want to highlight with this map here that you can see that lots of these concepts are originating in the United States and are quite successful, expanding all over the world. In Europe, we have a number of brands, but we do not have too many really European brands. We have, of course, Zalando, who's quite active, and we have a number of other brands which are quite famous in one or two countries, like we have bol.com, for instance, but that's still on a very country scale or country plus type of scale. And apart from that, many retailers have their own web shop as well. But that still remains a very intra-European business. When we talk about cross-border, as I just said, we look at the flows between the different continents. And if you look at the largest cross-border companies, here you have the top 25 of companies who are active in Europe. Some of them are not considered in the dollar amounts as cross-border, but you can still see that top 25, most of them are based or at least originated in the United States. And this also gives like an idea of the amounts. You talk about the turnover of these marketplaces in Europe. So eBay is an American company, Amazon is an American company, but the value, the euro amount, their revenues are 84 billion estimated in 2020, of which Amazon is by far the largest, followed by eBay. And if you look at where does this really come from, sometimes it's not always very easy to say it is B2C, business to consumer, or it is consumer to consumer, or sometimes business to business. That is not always easy. eBay is a typical consumer to consumer platform, but on the other side, quite a lot of resellers are active in there. The same with B2C. Where do you make the split between B2C and B2B? But anyway, for the moment, you can see the splits here. What's also important here is that fresh food, if you look at the euro amounts, is still negligible. And there we have, of course, the Uber Eats and the Deliveroo, which are in there, but also the supermarkets who delivered their food online. That's still a very, very small part. The majority is still physical goods originating either from a B2C or the C2C basis from Amazon, eBay, or one of the other platforms. Important to know is that Amazon is by far the number one, is also the most active, is also the most successful, and is also the one that seems to grow the fastest, not only in the United States, but also in most of the European countries. You see this is growing. Europe does not like that too much. It gets under quite a lot. The retailers feel they are being undercut in their prices, being cut in their business model, and the lobbying groups are starting, and they say you have to react. And a logical way is saying, okay, but you're missing import duties, you're missing VAT. Lots of these parcels are at low value, but they come in with cheated invoices, with the prices which are too low, or a sample or whatever. There's lots of cheating in a way, especially from the eastern side, not to name names. There was a study from the Copenhagen University who said that last year we lost, it's significant, not significant to how you think about it, but 60% of these parcels should normally be declared and generate import duties and VAT, but they don't. So we are losing quite a lot of money, which is always a good motivation for the governments to do something about that. So what did Europe do? Europe, they levied taxes, and they said from now onwards, you have to pay, at the 1st of January this year, you have to pay VAT on $0 already. So all parcels coming in Europe are subject to VAT, which is a good incentive for most of the countries, because the majority of the VAT they can keep themselves. And the import duties in Europe are levied on a European level. The countries, they get a certain percentage from it, that these import duties are levied from 150 euro onwards. So this means that all the parcels coming in Europe are normally subject to VAT. And that's already a hurdle. You order things without VAT, then you can be annoyed by the post or by DHL or whoever is bringing you the parcel. You have to pay extra. So most of the retailers here were thinking that this would have an effect. We have not seen that effect yet for the moment. We are looking at it. We think, my colleague Hevers and myself, we did some studies around it. It will have an impact, but probably there will be kind of learning curve before people start to realize that ordering something from AliExpress for $10, you might end up paying another $10 in taxes in a way. Also, the United States basically originated from the Trump administration. There's still kind of abuse with the postal systems. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but post has always been considered since the Chicago Convention in 1944 as something special. You send a letter to this country, and the country sends, or the person in that country sends a letter back. And there's always an equilibrium. You send something and you get something back. And our parcels were not too important. Sometimes for New Year, you send a parcel to your aunt, and maybe sometimes you get one back. So up to 2 kilograms was considered as a letter. And then they made like an agreement saying, if we bring the parcel to the head office, or to the like Brussels airport is, for instance, the injection point for postal offices, all the post offices around the world, they have to bring it to Brussels airport, to that hub. And from that Brussels airport, the Belgian post is in charge of delivering that parcel or that letter to the end destination. And depending what type of country you were, if you're a rich country, you have to pay something. If you're a developing country, like China still is on the list, you almost have to pay nothing, which means that China Post basically can bring parcels into Europe, but in fact all over the world for almost free. That has changed. The Trump administration threatened to pull out of the postal union in Basel. They made an agreement in the end, and over the next 5 years, you know, with post office things go slowly sometimes. Within 5 years, all the individual countries can increase the injection rates, as we call it, for the local post offices, the national post offices, to deliver these parcels. So you will already see that the post offices will have to increase their fares. And you look at the state of the Belgian Post, it might even be good for the Belgian Post to do that. So some market observations. We have another 4.5 minutes. It's a fact that cross-border B2C e-commerce grows faster, and the figures have been doubling as e-commerce grows between 10 and 12% a year. Cross-border e-commerce grows between 20 and 25% per year, depending on the country. As I said in the beginning, you see the large players are consolidating, mainly because the international sellers, they like to join a successful platform. And the most successful platforms, of course, are platforms like Amazon, like Alibaba. So the large ones are growing even faster. And there was a dope, as we call it, for the e-commerce growth. Thanks to the COVID-19 situation, people certainly had time to order, to look for deals, for bargains. And you see that e-commerce, but also cross-border e-commerce had a huge dope, a huge additional purchase volume was ordered through this cross-border. Everyone is struggling. All these large platforms are struggling a lot to keep their operations going. Also, the last mile, colleague Professor Gevers will focus a bit more on it. But you also see another thing, and that was already happening before COVID, that all these marketplaces are very cash rich. Why is that? They get the money straight away from the people who order. They only have to pay it then 30 or 60 days later to the shipper, to the shipper or the retail seller. So most of them are very, very cash rich, and they tend to invest more and more in a vertical merger and acquisition strategy. They want to control their supply chain downstream, even in supermarkets. Not going to focus too much on it, but you see Amazon, they recently bought Whole Foods. It helps them for the last mile. It helps them to create the value proposition of their company. And Alibaba did exactly the same in China with a number of partnerships they have done locally. That was the legislative time. The market we have discussed. Let's have a look at the logistics. Air freight is under pressure. You see the air cargo capacity on the left-hand side, and because there are hardly any passenger flights on long haul, which means the belly used to be responsible 50% of all air cargo shipped around the world. Suddenly there are hardly any passenger airlines flying around, which means the capacity decreased a lot. And maybe behind the pictures you can see that the demand now, 2021 in January, was exactly the same as the demand in 2019. So you don't have to be a big economist if you know demand is increasing and supply is going down, which means the price is doubled or trebled, more or less. And that's very annoying if you're a cross-border company. Airlines tried to increase the capacity by putting these passenger freighters, we call it preighter, by putting even parcels on the seats. You also see that shipping companies like CMA, for instance, they set up an airline to fly from Liège to the United States, where there are normally never freighters flying between these two continents because most of the freight is in passenger aircraft. But even Amazon is ordering lots of new aircraft. Already 25% of all the 737 freighters, it's a small freighter, are already operated by Amazon. So they are also controlling their own supply chain. E-commerce is also put at the bottom of the list, as normally the willingness to pay for this transport is quite low. A lot of it is being sent as well through China Post, if you look at it from the China side. There was always priority for something else. So you have huge piles, you have delivery issues with that. Also, the size and the weight of the parcels increased significantly. My colleague, Professor Hevers, will focus a bit further on it. And it really resulted in a tsunami of parcels which have to be delivered to the customer. So what are my main takeaways, Tom? And then I can finish just in time, is that the large cross-border e-commerce platform, they are the winners. They gain market share. Of course, they also enjoy economies of scale, scope, and density, and that they're very, very rich. And there's a beautiful word in Dutch. They are on the winkelslag. They're really looking for further vertical merger and acquisitions in the supply chain or in other distribution channels, which could even be supermarkets. We haven't seen that in Europe yet. We're quite sure that will happen one day. The legislative reactions, think about the UPU and the taxes. For the moment, they had a very limited impact on the growth of these platforms. There might be a learning curve, but we see what impact this has. But what had a big impact is the capacity squeeze on the international routes. There's hardly any capacity for cross-border e-commerce for the moment, unless if they pay the full prices. Amazon gets very annoyed with that, so they set up their own freighters. And what you also see is then number 4 is that these big market players are increasingly setting up their own distribution and their own warehousing in the continent itself, and they dispatch from there. So the goods are coming in by container or by aircraft. For instance, like in Liège, and Alibaba dispatches these parcels one by one to the end consumers from Liège. So you see, this is one of the takeaways which are happening, and you see more and more these own local warehouses and distribution networks being set up, which is good news if you're building warehouses, which is good news if you're renting warehouses. But on the other side, the winner takes it all is a disadvantage. But the question is, will these niche players like bol.com and the other really very local country players survive? Maybe that could be an interesting question for the discussion. That's it, Tom. I conclude my presentation here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Wouter, for the presentation. If there are any questions or comments, please put them into the chat. I'm welcoming that. If there are any now urgent feedback questions, fast questions for Professor De Wilde, do let me know. If not, I want to move forward, given the time as well, with our next speaker. It's the next speaker is Professor Gevars, Roel Gevars. He's also working both at the Antwerp Management School and at the University of Antwerp. He's also, I think he's with his 2 feet, at least 1 feet in academia, 1 feet in practice, and I think he has a quite very interesting perspective from that point of view. And he's going to give his view on the COVID-19 versus the last mile distribution systems, which we are probably stretching more and more at this moment in time. I saw last time if that apparently now around 300 packages per delivery agent per day is quite normal. So, and this is growing every day, every week. So it's going to be an interesting challenge to manage that. Roel has all the answers, so I want to give him the floor. Professor Gevaars, the floor is to you.
Thank you, Professor Van Woensel. Okay, good afternoon to you all. I'm going to start sharing my screen, if it's coming. Okay, good afternoon to you all. I hope that you see me. If not, let me know. So I will take you in the next couple of minutes, in the next quarter of an hour, through the last mile, to the parcel last mile, and I will speak about the systems. They were under pressure, and did they survive? So, and to start with, I would like to take you to some facts about the last mile. Sorry. If my slides, okay, sorry. I would like to take you to some of the facts, and I know you see here a lot of on this slide, but I would like to take you to 9 facts that were already happening before, let's say before Corona or pre-Corona. If you look to the last mile, to the B2C sector, yeah, the parcel sector, the B2C sector. First of all, everybody knows it, e-commerce was already growing, and Belgium was a bit lacking behind, but Belgium was getting shorter to the other countries in growth rate of e-commerce. The second fact is that if you look to the parcel market itself, you still had in Western countries still the big company was in the most cases the incumbent postal parcel player, like in Belgium bpost, in the Netherlands PostNL, and you had extra players like Today, GLS, DPD, etc., etc. That's also a given fact. That was already before Corona, the fact. Fourth fact is that if you look to the B2C markets, is that it's a very specific market. It's also what Professor De Wulf already said. You have some very big players there. So in most cases, 80% of the volume, 80% of the online shopping volume is coming from only 20% of the brands and vice versa, which makes it sometimes from a logistical point not that easy for the small players. And the whole market is based on, still today in Western world, on next day delivery. You see shifts, but it was by then next day delivery. So what means that in most cases, all those parcels are treated during the night between 1 a.m. and let's say 7 a.m. in the morning. And another fact, the fifth fact, is that the whole market was mainly working with subcontractors. Some national postal operators do it less, but you see that overall the market, the last mile market, is a subcontractor market and a high degree of automation, mainly for those parcels. And of course, if you check that market again, it's a very centralized market in most cases for those parcels. So in most cases, large parcel companies have 1 or 2, maximum 3 warehouses pre-Corona, highly automated but centralized with a long last mile. If you then go to the next fact, that's the 7th one. In most cases, all those e-commerce companies, or the biggest ones, had in most cases only 1 preferred party to collaborate with. You had some with a second one, but in most cases it was 1 web shop who had 1 parcel company for the B2C last mile, which means that they had, especially with the 80-20 approach, that they had huge pressure on the prices. And if you look to the market itself, the last mile market is a rather low margin market from profit perspective. And a last thing is, of course, that the whole market was already under a kind of pressure to work more sustainable. These were, let's say, 9 facts that were already there pre-Corona. But then 1 year ago, I assume everybody is aware of that, we saw a lot of these signs. Sorry, we were closed due to COVID-19. And then if we check the figures from Belgium and the Netherlands, we saw in the 1 year ago growth rates in e-commerce, mainly of in Belgium 200%, also in the Netherlands 150%, etc. First couple of months of the first wave. But there was something particular about that wave. And that particular thing is that, and that you see in fact one in next to number 1, everybody speaks about the growth in e-commerce, but if you check the figures, it seems that like traditional electronics and even fashion, they did not grow, they went down. And the fashion thing is something funny about that one. You saw working at home, a lot of people wearing nice suits and etc. above the screen, and below they were wearing shorts, for example. So you saw a decrease in fashion, but there was one particular thing, is that the number of oversized items ordered exploded. People ordered playing toys, trampolines, they ordered tires, they ordered barbecues, paintings, all heavy stuff, all 15, 20, 25 kilo. They ordered that everything online. And that you see on the third picture there, that are figures from several last mile players in the Belgian market. And you see as from the 12th week in 2020, so as from March, you saw an explosion of those oversized items. And I saw in the chat as well some minutes ago a question. Also, indeed, the food market itself underwent a big growth, like the lasers.be and the food boxes also underwent a huge growth, but I will mainly focus here on the parcel market itself. But the main thing was oversized items exploded. But what would that mean? Well, if you look to such a last mile parcel system, in most cases, those centralized automated hubs, they were designed years ago. With a specific growth forecast, a design envelope, like you call it. And that means that if you make an automation, theory always says, and that you see in the rectangle at the right top of the slide, you calculate your average throughput, and that should be where you build your automation volume on. And your peaks, you try to cover them with manual labor, but that should be, that's in theory your automation throughput that you build. But you build it on a mix of products, let's say 50-60% of parcels up to 2 kilo, and then some more heavy products, but it's a design envelope where you make an estimation of the total product group. But what you saw during that first wave was that you had a huge growth in volume, so the green dotted line, so your total demand is going up. But due to the fact that you had enormous amounts of oversized, heavy-weighted items, those conveyor systems blocked in many cases, and you ended up with a capacity, a throughput of the red dotted line. So a huge gap in between those two. And that made, during that first wave, or during that first lockdown, now a year ago, that a lot of problems happened in the last mile. So the main learnings there was, from that point of view, the mix of product at that moment made that it almost killed the automated system. More manual labor was needed, and next to that also vans were quicker full, driver shortages. And another thing which was also specific is that in most cases, parcel companies, they use national pricing, so one price for the whole of Belgium or the whole of Netherlands, for example. And also the payments they do to the subcontractors are rather flat, but something there is, of course, it's not the same. Delivery a parcel of 2 kilo is something totally different than 20 kilos. So you saw a lot of things happening there, and drivers were saying, we don't like that anymore. And another thing was that we saw that logistics, this was purely a peak pulled by the customers, not arranged by, let's say, marketing. It was not a promotional campaign. It was unforeseen, and that made that the whole system was not foreseen for that one. But let's say, as from June, yeah, and then indeed what you saw a lot of times on your in your mailbox, sorry, we were too late. So indeed, during the first wave, the whole system was under pressure and stressed and could not handle most volumes. But okay, remark was it's only temporary up till June. Growth figures will stabilize. Still high degrees between 25 and 50% in the Netherlands and Belgium, but it was said the big issues that happened during the first part of the year, they will not come again. But then we saw later that year a second wave, and there it was more outspoken in Belgium. Again, growth rates of up to 150, 200% in Belgium, a bit less in the Netherlands, but we saw again a huge growth rate. But another special thing is that in that phase, we saw that all categories were growing, let's say, evenly. So it was not anymore the fact that it were the oversized items, it were all categories that were growing evenly. So one would think the system could be more working, or it could be more managed to have that full flow operational. But what we did then was, it was end of year. And the marketing guys decided, let's say in that period, to organize a thing like this, Black Friday. A lot of web shops were wanted to push enormous volumes through the whole network. And what you saw then was this. In November, December, big fuss in the last mile parcel markets in Belgium and the Netherlands and our surrounding countries, that a lot of postal parcel players had to stop delivery, even you had to pick it up, etc., etc. But what can we learn from all those things? Well, we can say that during the second wave, it became clear that many of those problems became structural. And then, of course, Professor De Wulf and myself, we had to look into some strategies. Which strategies can deal with facts, like I already said, low margins, high capital expenditure, automation, hub and spoke systems, outsourcing, and very peak sensitive sectors. Can the parcel sector learn something from other sectors? And what we saw there, and it might be a bit special, but what we saw there is that if you compare that to the aviation business of the 80s and the 90s, that was something similar. Also high capital expenditure, also very peak seasonal. But what they did is that they reformed their business into more not one incumbent party, but much more smaller players and an incumbent player, where you had a mix between premium products and low-cost products. You try to operate not only your plane for 8 hours, but try to fix it for 20 hours. The same for operational automated systems, which now only tend to work during the night. They made a split from hub and spoke system, but also point-to-point system, so from centralized to decentralized. And they have a totally different pricing perspective, meaning going away from those national fixed prices to a yield management system, meaning high demand is high prices, low demand is low prices. Yeah, and you could say that's a far away business, but what you see today is that if you look a bit more to the disruption in that sector, like a company in the 80s and the 90s was Southwest in the US, what did they do? They even went further. They stopped doing outsourcing. They introduced much more insourcing. They started doing cherry picking, like the very interesting urban areas, the very interesting markets. They had a policy of no overbooking. And they went to a point-to-point system. One can say, is that useful for the parcel industry? If we go one step further, it's already happening now. And even this, already multinational web shops are doing something similar things. Even the disruptors in the last mile are doing it already. For example, these two companies launched a press message a week ago that they will come on the Belgian market, both Budbee and Colis Privé. Not a lot of fuzz in the Belgian market for it, but it's important to know they are both insourced companies. I mean, from a stock perspective, Zalando and H&M are collaborating, are shareholders from Budbee. Amazon is shareholder from Colis Privé. So it's already happening on that market. And also another thing which we saw clearly in the whole market is that cities, like for example here, the city of Milan, they noticed COVID is not nice, but they saw one nice thing about COVID is the fact that they saw in a lot of squares without trucks, without fence, etc. So they are implementing more and more legislation saying we want to keep a bit the silence of the city during Corona. And the other thing is that due to the trend, which was already happening with convenience, you see that a lot of web shops want to get away from the exclusivity. They want to go to a multi-carrier model where they can have multiple carriers depending on the area, a much more decentralized approach. And then, of course, you see, and that's, for example, an example from the Netherlands, A company called Retje Pakketje, they only were launched 2-3 years ago. But if you look to the last mile, that was the big winner of the last mile in the Netherlands, and it's a premium player. They ask 2 or 3 times the price of PostNL, but it was one of the main winners of the last mile in the Netherlands. So having said that, I'm wrapping up with some conclusions, and I know it was a lot of information, but I think companies and the sector should ask themselves, those national prices, is that a good way, or should you go to a yield management system? High demand is higher prices. How to deal with driver shortages. Another thing what we see is that, are there limits to those XXL automation warehouses? I mean, automation for sure, but I assume they will be more decentralized for the last mile itself. I'm not speaking inbound, but last mile itself. Another thing, other cutoff times for optimizing your automation. Is it useful to only use your automation during the night? I don't think so. Oversized will play an important role to the future. And another thing what we see as well is, and that's the before last one, I'm not going into detail on all of those, but there is still a huge gap in how retailers are linked with parcel distribution. I mean, you saw during the pandemic that a lot of webshop players were pushing volumes to parcel operators, ending there like, you cannot deliver your truck. In a way, it should be like in airline business as well. If the plane is full, you don't sell a ticket anymore. So in that way, interfacing between a retailer, if the parcels distributor says, tomorrow the network is full, don't ship another truck anymore because you know it will be a problem. So that's in a nutshell, and I hope I stayed a bit within time, an overview of what is happening in the market. A lot of things were already happening, but you saw that the speeding of the whole thing increased significantly. And having said that, I want to end up here my presentation, and feel free to ask questions.
Thank you, Roel. Thank you very much. If there is any question, please put it into the chat. I think it was very nice that you answered already one question in the chat about the food e-commerce. And at least we still have, of course, time to ask other questions to Professor Gevaers in the roundtable discussion we will have after, of course, the last presentation. So I would like to now move to the last part. We have been basically looking into this cross-border e-commerce situation. What is the consequence of COVID-19? Professor Gevaers was very reflective on the role of the last mile distribution systems, the pressure over there, the challenges. And now I would like to move with Professor Verhetsel into the COVID-19, whether it's killing the shopping street or not. And we are moving really into the last part of the supply chain, if you want. Professor Verhetsel is the head of the Department of Transport and Regional Economics in the University of Antwerp. She's also the program director of the Real Estate Master at Antwerp Management School. And her research is very much focusing on the interaction between economic geography and urban planning. So, Professor Verhetsel, Anne, I would like to give you the floor. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Tom, for the introduction. I go straight forward to the question, is COVID killing the shopping street? So to answer this question on how e-commerce and COVID impact on shopping real estate, we have to sketch how the real retail landscape looks like. And there is nowadays more than the shopping street, of course. It's not working. So how is the changing retail landscape? How does it look like nowadays? In Europe, retail has its origins in the medieval markets near castles and monasteries. Their inhabitants were the first consumers who could buy the surplus of traditional production. Where consumption became sufficiently large and stable, permanent shops emerged on central locations. And for a very long time, retail remained small in scale. A true special retail revolution only occurred after World War II, although some organizational, commercial, technological evolutions had already taken place in the mid-19th and early 20th century. So mainly since the 1950s, large supermarkets and hypermarkets, as well as other big box developments in the urban periphery, have profoundly changed the traditional shopping landscape. In Western Europe, it started with a scale increase in food retail sector, while still dominated by small traditional shops until after World War II. The food retail sector became dominated by the supermarkets and hypermarkets of multiple retailers from the 1960s onwards. This new rational organization of retailing resulted in a supply shift from centers to periphery. Centers generally lacked the necessary space or real estate to house large-scale retailing or provide substantial parking facilities. And additionally, the market was shifting to the periphery following the suburbanization of the middle class population. Three waves of decentralization can be discerned. After the first wave in the 1960s with food retailing, the second wave started around the 1980s and typically concerned big box developments selling bulky items like furniture, do-it-yourself items, white goods, gardening items, and so on. A third wave, the decentralization of luxury goods like clothing and shoes, started in the early 1990s in Western Europe, but failed to fully materialize as policies largely quelled peripheral shopping malls. In Western Europe, to a far lesser extent than in the US, the peripheral shopping malls were built. And from the 1990s, shopping malls were located mainly in Europe in the inner cities. From the 1990s, there are also strong urban policies that emerged to tackle the exodus from the city centers. Inner city retail management was implemented, as most traditional shopping streets suffered a lot from competition of all these massive investments in out-of-town shopping locations during the former 3 decades. Then from the 1990s onwards, we see the deconcentration trends seem to have peaked. And some urban retail centers started to flourish again, thanks to regeneration efforts. This resulted in a dual retail landscape with pleasant central shopping areas for fun shopping and rational peripheral locations suitable for run shopping. Many chains now follow a dual strategy of being present in both city centers as well as along approach roads. This is very clear in the food sector, for example, where big box developments have increasingly been supplemented with small urban formats. And this trend can also be observed in luxury and even bulky good retailing. Mainly secondary shopping centers and scattered stores have a hard time surviving in this dual strategy landscape. In recent years, of course, e-commerce has emerged as a third channel, accommodating sofa shopping and home delivery. E-commerce is still dominated, like it was proven already by the former speakers, by pure online players. Although most brick and mortar retailers also have an online presence nowadays. Multi-channel retailers offer goods through the various sales channels. And for some products, such as travel and insurance, e-commerce has been extremely disruptive for traditional brick and mortar retailing. However, the interplay between distribution channels is often still lagging, and although the degree of integration from multi-channel towards omni-channel depends on the retailer, for many goods, the future probably lies with omni-channel retailers due to significant competitive advantages over pure online players. We have seen the example already of Amazon buying supermarkets, but it also started bookshops in the United States. Material stores remain crucial. Both retail supermarkets and inner city stores are increasingly used as pickup points or even storage for e-commerce. The integration of different logistic chains in one system holds many opportunities for the future. A future with retail in central shopping streets for fun shopping, peripheral shops for efficient run shopping, and sofa shopping through distribution centers and pickup points. So the impact of e-commerce is clear and was there already before COVID. It added a third channel with new retail real estate, distribution centers, pickup points, but with a future for the inner city shop and out-of-town supermarket when they become part of an integrated logistics system serving the very flexible consumer. So, what's the impact on this retail landscape? Let's start with daily shopping. The local shops, the city formats, were doing already very good before the COVID time. And consumers show far more fragmented and flexible shopping behavior nowadays. And during lockdown, the proximity of these city formats was a huge advantage. And I think this will go on in the future. Question is if local specialized luxury shops will survive if they do not integrate permanent web shop. Lots of them started a web shop during lockdown. More consumers started buying online, as we saw in the graphs of Roel. But research from Joris Beckers of our department concluded that lots of these new web shops will go down after COVID. And the question is if this will not be a threat as the consumers found the way to web shops and to buy online. So local shops risk to lose turnover when they will not be maintaining their web shop. Let's go to the small and regional cities then. We had already high vacancy rates for a long time in the small and regional cities. Consumers skip this level. For example, someone living in the neighborhood of a small city skips this small city and even the nearby regional city to go shopping in a large city, especially due to more free time and growing mobility. Traveling only a short time longer to a larger city offers the consumers a broad range of shops and other services. And despite policies promising to support central shopping in small and regional cities, this has not worked out up till now. Moreover, most of these small and regional cities and even very small communes delivered permits for out-of-town shop services that far exceeded the market potential. So also these peripheral locations nearby small and regional cities will decrease the consumers in the central shopping streets in small and regional cities. But during COVID, we have seen that the shopping streets in small and regional cities showed an increased attractivity due to proximity, and more people were buying local. But I guess this will be only temporary. Then let's go finally to the high streets. Is COVID killing them? These high streets had already longer, large vacancies, especially large surfaces that are not adapted to a modern retail organization. Because due to flexible and fragmented organization of the logistics for shops, what is needed in the store can easily be delivered daily by urban logistics. And the store is not longer a kind of warehouse with all sizes and all colors available in big quantities. These high street services are too expensive to serve as a warehouse. Indeed, for some years, the rents on top locations are overheated, and tenants of these large services seek to rationalize on these expensive large locations. They invest in cheap peripheral locations, or they move to smaller services in the city center, somewhat away from the top locations, and they invest in a web shop like H&M in the last time. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated especially this trend towards e-commerce, as the product categories of the high streets, clothing and shoes, are very popular and suitable for sofa shopping. So how to survive? This can be really an issue to discuss later on. Some thoughts from my side. Lower retail estate prices would really help. Owners are still speculating on the recovery of high rental levels. This will not help. Dividing large surfaces and introducing and implement new innovative formats, for example, including workshops and studios, can be a way to use the larger surfaces in the inner cities. Also, providing new services in the inner cities like pickup and return facilities could help these brick and mortar shopping. And I would say bringing the residential function again in the shopping streets and combine shopping management with cultural management and rethink the public space in the shopping streets. All the things I proposed, this will require a large co-production between government, shop owners and shopkeepers. In most cities, urban policy does not focus on the top shopping locations, as for the last 2 decades, these were perfectly able to organize themselves. Rather, local retail policy concentrated on all secondary shopping streets that lost almost all viable shops. It would be good to turn again, I think, like in the 90s, to the high streets and to invest to build innovative and sustainable retail environments in our top high streets. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor van Hetzel. Thank you. I'm going to do some stuff. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Anne. Are there any other questions from the audience for Anne? Please put them into the chat, and then I will point them to Anne. In the meantime, I would also like to use the last part of the session is to have some discussion amongst the three of the speakers here. And please, if you have any remarks, feedback you would like to question to either one of them or to all of them, please put them into the chat as well, and I will give you the floor. Now, there is one remark that actually triggered me as well in the chat, and that's a question from Bert, and I will use Bert's question a little bit to build upon that question. So I think all of you have, Wouter, Roel, you gave nice views on each of the different dimensions after COVID-19 from 3 different perspectives, in a sense. And what happens now? What is now, let's say in a year from now, we have another webinar, and or hopefully not a webinar anymore, but maybe a physical seminar, and what is left and what is new then? And what do we, so do we build, so should we see this period which we have as an exception, and we go afterwards, we pick up where we started before, or we ended up before COVID-19? Or is it really a game changer? And should we actually basically revise all strategies and everything we are doing in the supply chain accordingly? And I'm not sure who wants to add or wants to give his view on that. Maybe Roel, Professor Gevaars, you first.
Yes, I will immediately kick off that. Where are we within a year? Well, what I wanted to do with my presentation is to trigger a bit the thinking. And I saw as well, indeed, like the question of Bert, should we develop a strategy based only on this period, because it's exceptional. But what you see is that a lot of trends that a lot of facts that I indicated about the last mile were already happening. But you saw that during this whole pandemic, those, and then I refer to what Professor De Wulf said, those cash generating web shops, they have that amount of cash that they started to increase investments in all those innovative approaches. And I know sometimes it's a bit a company that is referred always to, and I leave in the middle if that's okay or not. But if you look to, for example, the Amazon model in the US, they already have 7 or 8 different last mile flows, from the very decentralized to the very centralized. Yeah, and up till now in Europe, we did not see that happen. You saw it happening a bit, but rather low level. But the pandemic now has pushed it so hard through that we see in a lot of the companies, a lot of countries happening that. So if I should reply on Bert's question, but also on the next one of yours, yeah, I think you should take into account what is happening now. And I'm not saying that it will be always the same, but you see a shift toward more decentralized, speedy deliveries away from those massive things. So in a year, probably we will see those things still being here and even increased by bigger parties and investments. That's my opinion.
Also, probably then to connect to that, what Mr. Rosart is saying is that probably COVID seems to be now an accelerator of not necessarily only innovation, but also other things happening, meaning maybe even going from these very large, big warehouses with everything more and more closer to the customer, maybe with more variety and more possibility to handle that type of supply chain, if you want. Professor De Wulf, if you want to add something?
Yes, I fully agree with what my colleague is saying. It definitely, some tendency were already there, so it definitely accelerated. And you see lots of things are here to stay. That's people also change their behavior. One and two. I mean, do not underestimate. Sometimes the Amazon and Alibaba, they really struggled the last year, and many of them said this is not going to happen anymore. I will not be so reliable on this supply chain, which I cannot control. Like Amazon, they ordered additional aircraft. They're not going to sell these aircraft. So yes, certain things are temporary, but quite a lot of things will definitely continue, even more. They will be accelerated.
Right, it's at least a good accelerator for many other stuff, apparently. And Professor Verhetzel, you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say that indeed, like I said, a lot of things we saw during COVID are existed before, and I don't see in the real estate COVID as a game changer, but as an accelerator. And I saw the question of, yeah, no, I leave the questions to you. Yeah.
No, but you can do it, of course.
Yeah. Of Joost Ubens, who's suggesting, am I to go with my logistics buildings into the inner city with new? I think so, and or even he says in empty offices. Well, I don't think there will be so many empty offices suitable for that, because you will need offices also for other things. But for sure, there are quite large services of retail that are available, and to integrate the logistics in the inner city, in the shops, and in the shopping streets, if not in the shops.
Yeah, and I also I hear you saying as well, and I want to echo that probably this is COVID-19 speeded some of these processes up. It actually accelerated many of these kind of processes. But obviously, as you also mentioned, these moving into more and more omni-channel movements, where you are using different functions for, let's say, old type of setups like stores and whatever. You also see that this was, of course, already happening before COVID-19, but you see that now these functions are getting more and more used, and also more and more desirable, and you see also that more and more people And maybe that's also in a B2C type of setting. I think it's quite interesting to see that more and more people are at least have tried something in these online e-commerce type of modalities and have been experimenting and playing with that. So maybe one thing, and that's something when I was listening to each of you, and I think it was somehow maybe implicitly in each of the stories, is that in the past there was of course something like a discussion about the battle of supply chains. It's not companies battling anymore, but it is supply chains battling. Now, if I listen a little bit careful, and I'm probably translating it to something which might not be correct, but that's nice. That's the idea. Is it seems to be getting more and more a battle of platforms, and platforms meaning like Amazon, Alibaba's, who is not only doing, let's say, the sales and the marketing and the traditional maybe retail stuff, but also really going into warehousing, airplanes, and it is not always clear even that that it is actually Amazon or it is powered by Alibaba, because it's sometimes quite hidden and it is bought by, or they have shares and whatever have you. And is this a sort of a negative effect of COVID? Because I think also that is somehow accelerated, that these platforms are getting more powerful. And it might be a negative or a positive effect, and I'm not sure about. So two questions maybe. Do you recognize that this is happening? And do you think it is a positive evolution or a negative evolution? Because also Professor De Wolf said maybe the bol.coms are not going to survive anymore because of that. And that's very under the radar happening. Professor De Wolf, you want to add something?
Yes, of course. I think it is definitely correct what you're saying. I think it's a very good statement. It will be the battle of the platforms, and you will see also in social media the winner seems to take it all. If you look at Facebook, for instance, of course not all over the world, but you see that even on social media, the largest one seems to take it all. Is it good or bad? Yes, monopolies, duopolies are never good for the consumer. But then normally governments tend to intervene at a certain moment. But that's the market, isn't it? How it is going, and it will become increasingly difficult as well for the small ones to compete. If you look at economies of scale and scope, but also density, if you own the supply chain vertically, as Professor Levers was saying, in the end they have such a strong network, it's almost impossible to do it on your own, and you have to link yourself up with them. So is that good or bad? Short term may be good, longer term maybe not, is my opinion.
Okay. Professor Van Hetzel?
Yeah, I agree with Wouter. I was just thinking the same. I think in the integration of the logistics systems within retailing, of course, our small local, maybe not so small like the Torfs and the IS Adventures and so on, they are not so small, but they don't have a lot of experience with those platforms, and they rely on these platforms. And well, these platforms, they come now in the center of their retailing activities. So that's really something to look at. And yeah, it's threatening, I think. Yeah.
Why threatening? Okay, why?
Well, because I think because the activity of retailing will be secondary in the reasoning of the platforms. And that's a pity, because the retail is there for the consumer and the platforms are further away in taking care of consumers' wishes, I think. Okay. So, yeah.
Do you agree, Professor Gevaert?
I fully agree with what you were saying, that you see it all happening. And the interesting thing there is as well, and it's always something which always pops up in this kind of webinar. The fact is that those companies, not only they own the flow, they own the flow. And even if you are a small web shop and you wanted to start with online sales, the easiest was to just put your products on such a platform. That was the easiest from IT perspective. But another thing which we did not say, those big massive platforms, they also have all the data They know exactly when you buy it, where you buy it. They even know before you that you are going to buy toilet paper with forecasting and IoT and forecastings, etc. And the other thing is as well that if you are such an integrated large platform, you can already interface much better your last mile. Like I said, if the van is full, you know already upfront that it will be full. While if you work with non-integrated systems, they still are very separated from each other. They are interfaced but very limited, and they will still have. And there again, those platforms have huge advantages and economies of scale and etc. But indeed, you will see some big, huge platforms there, and the winner takes it all when he can. Yes.
And the challenge, if I may, Tom, the challenge will be for these platforms. How can you make the comparative advantage towards your peers? And if you look like someone like Coolblue, for instance, who really try to have the additional service, install the washing machine, and install the printer, even have physical shops where you can bring in your laptop when it's broken or whatever. That's probably a business model where they can compete. But if you do exactly the same as Amazon or Alibaba, it's very difficult win because you don't have the economies of scale, you don't have the economies of density.
Yeah, and of course, and I also echo, I think I also agree up to a certain point with Anne, what she is saying, that it could also be threatening, of course, because it could be a sort of the retailing could be a sort of a side product at a certain point. And even I also would expect that even if you would say I'm a niche player, or I'm actually giving these extra services, that also at a certain point, the Amazons will also probably have service engineers, installation engineers, and they actually will also be doing quite a lot of these type of activities. And another thing, what I think is a critical one is that these type of platforms are global players, and they need to act in a local context. And I think that is going to be the challenge for these big platforms, these globalized platforms. And that's probably where these more, let's say, smaller niche players, other type of stores are still probably having a strong position. And of course, all of these kind of things, the question becomes, is it a unique proposition? Is it unique, and can it be copied easily, yes or no? And I think that may be even for Amazon easier, because they might be more locally present, and maybe Alibaba might be more difficult, but I have basically no real, that's going to be, at the end, everything can be copied except what is really unique. And in this kind of setting, it becomes very difficult, I think. So I would like to ask, I see Saurabh had a question or a feedback. Would you like to raise this point, Saurabh, yourself, maybe? If you unmute.
Hi, Tom. This is Saurabh.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the first one or second one?
Yeah, the point about your Amazon point and other big e-com giants, if you want.
Yeah. So what I was thinking while you raised your point is that like you mentioned that the Amazon and the other giants are coming in the freight platform. I think that will push our regular freight forwarders like DHL, FedEx in the competition, like I wrote in the comment. And then, like you mentioned, that service engineers and installation engineers, if they push, that. In that competition with Amazon, we might see lesser charges in freight and installation in coming future. That might be the positive impact. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you want to add?
I mean, what will be your advice? That's what I was looking after.
Okay. Walter, do you want to react? Or
Yeah, I think it's a difficult discussion. I understand the point, what he's trying to make, but there are additional reasons why Amazon and so on is doing this, because they want to own the supply chain. But it's so very weird. You have a shop and someone else is delivering the customer experience when you open the door and you get your parcel. I mean, that really is not right, no? And that's also one of the reasons why Amazon really loves to have this supply chain. So the cost is one thing, but the customer experience and the control are other things as well. So I only up to a certain point agree with the point that the gentleman is saying.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I also see a remark from Francis. Francis, do you want to make a remark as well?
Yeah, let's see. Can you hear me now?
We do
Yeah.
hear you. Go
Okay.
ahead.
The point I'm trying to make is that what COVID has shown to many companies today is the disruption in the whole supply chain management. They are looking for alternatives, and the importance, the strategic importance of supply chain management has become very obvious to many companies today. In the past, it has been basically companies focusing on excellence, operational, very good, making sure that low cost, good service, everything. Today, it's becoming a part of the strategic thinking. I mean, it has to be on top. It's on top of mind of many companies, and obviously e-commerce and the Alibabas and the Amazon.com are part of the whole scenario. It's part of the design of supply chain management. The point I'm trying to make is that how strategic it has become to think about what's going on. And Alibaba, I said Amazon.com. I remember about 10 years ago, when people talked about Amazon, they said, oh, they are not making any money. They're losing money. Well, they were making the money out of the cloud services, and they're still making millions of money out of cloud, and they have built up a whole supply chain system. We call that in the good old days one-stop shopping. They have now planes, they have warehouses, they have IT, they have everything. They are setting the example for a lot of other companies, and I'm getting a little bit nervous about quote unquote the monopoly of what they are building up. I mean, they're eating up everybody. And the latest news, you showed that on this French company that's entering the Belgian and the Netherlands market today. Amazon is a shareholder of that company. So what's left? I mean, the competition is going to have a big problem. I mean, and the point that Wouter de Wulf was making about the bol.coms, I think that some of them must be worried about Amazon and others and the Alibabas. So there's a long story, but the point I was making is it's how fundamentally strategic supply chain management has become. And that's good news for all of us who are active in this business.
Roel, do you want to add to that or react to that from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to fully agree on that one. And that's why I also put in my presentation that slide about the Black Friday. It was the first time in history. Normally, as you all know, and I'm not that old, but normally it was always said marketing, finance, and the CEO that are the bosses of companies, they decide, and the supply chain and the logistics guy, they need to make it happen, operational. And what you saw now, it was already changing a bit, but what you saw during the COVID period is that at least in some companies, supply chain was becoming more and more important. And you saw even some webshops, large webshops, that reduced Black Friday due to the fact that their operational logistical manager said, we will have a big mess. And that was something, indeed, I fully agree with you, that companies are getting more and more aware about the fact that the whole supply chain, the logistics is much more important than only the marketing stuff around it.
Absolutely.
No, along the same lines, I also was, and it's probably a bit on the margin we have been talking about today. But even you see now that this is broader recognized that supply chain is quite important, because if you look at vaccine logistics, at the supply chains of vaccinations and also producing vaccines, you see that is quite under pressure in many ways, and actually it's visible now that it is under pressure and it is very needed. So I also was reading this morning an article in The Guardian about the fact that the Brexit discussion now is almost getting into a sort of a supply chain discussion, because if we do not deliver to them, they will not deliver ingredients to booths, and then it goes, and then you see that all these kind of supply chains are actually connected, and it is also not only strategically important for companies, but actually even strategically important for countries and for continents. And probably that was not very high on that agenda either. And that's quite interesting to see that we might be moving back into the boardroom all of a sudden, where we were probably not that long, where we were banned almost up to a certain point in time. But also, let's not make Amazon's case here. I think it's clear that Amazon is moving. Amazon has deep pockets, and they of course bring in lots of expertise. But also it touches indeed upon the other aspect, what somebody was saying, that they of course have the data. That was also said by Rule. They are using their data and their web services and whatever have you. And you could even argue that whether they are really a retailer or a data machine factory, and processing that. And where the money comes from, that's clear, but they have the money apparently. So that's but maybe as a sort of a last question from my side for each of you, and for each of the three speakers over here, if you is it what will be the new normal? Let's put it like this. What will now be the new normal in this B2C type of context? What do you think? And maybe a short, just a sort of a vision of the future.
Yes, well, for me, the new normal will be what I showed in the last phase of my slides, the omni-channel, where a consumer is in the morning going to the shopping street, in the afternoon ordering by e-commerce, and in the evening going to an out-of-town location to pick up the product. So that integration of all those channels, and yeah, the consumer is very flexible, and his geographical behavior is very fragmented. So I think the retailer will have to organize himself, and they will need more linkages, I think, with the logistics sector, with the urban logistics sector, to survive.
Okay, good, very good. Thank you very much, Professor De Wulf.
I see a further integration in the supply chain. The tendency which has started will continue. As I said before, I see consolidation of the number of market players, but in addition, still place for some room for some niche players, which create a unique selling point or an added value. That one. And I also think that if you look at the delivery options, we will have more delivery options, as my colleague Professor Evers was saying there. Not everything you need tomorrow and after tomorrow. If in the US, that's already happening. You can have same-day delivery. You can even have 2 hours delivery, maybe in the future with drones. You never know. But you can also have a slow delivery in 1 week where you use the postal offices. So I see a bit more range and more decisive impact from the consumer who will order.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Evers.
Yeah, I'm fully in line with that. And what will mean that is that we'll have, let's say, two models next to each other. The massive parcel market, very cheap prices, very low prices, a bit the economy saver will be probably next day or maximum max within 2 days. But then you will have a big amount of service deliveries, delivery within an hour, delivery within 2 hours, in-store picking, delivered by bikes, etc. And it will be a consumer that wants to have it sustainable and pay for it. That will be a market. The other one, the price aware consumer will have another method. And that's something in USA, you see that. In Asia, you see it. In Europe, less, but it will come.
Okay. And then one question I do have then, and that also echoes is a bit related to what the Koen was asking in the chat. It seems that we are doing more offerings. We're going to have more variety in delivery options, omni-channel strategies, and whatever have you. Are we going to be able to pay for that compared to our? Because are we able to pay for that in Belgium? Are we able to pay for the labor? Because the claim of Koen is that we are basically losing from Holland or the Netherlands, that we are not going to be able to actually pay for that, or we cannot do that cost efficient. Let's say it differently. That's maybe a cruel question. I'm aware of that. So,
well, I think we were not so good at it up till now, but when I see the new investments of the last months in new Belgian logistic players playing in this field, then I think they made their homework and they calculated. So I think it will be possible, yeah.
Okay. So given the time, we are about to end this webinar. I think overall I saw many very interesting new ideas, visions, and views of the COVID-19 in the sector. I think it's clear that it is an accelerator for new things, for innovation, also maybe even to speed up things which we are actions which we did see already happening in the supply chain, and it moves faster because of COVID-19. And obviously, also it's clear that even in some cases, COVID-19 is there. It just continues as we had already before, and it's not something special all of a sudden. But we're actually working on a certain path the past 3, 4, 5 years, and it is at least not stopping that path. That is also an interesting observation from my side. Also, moving from the battle of companies, from battle to supply chains, and now we are moving into the battle of platforms, and that platform is not always visible. That's also an interesting observation from my side, especially if I take the analogy with the battle of platforms like iPhone versus Samsung and whatever, that at least it is more or less a sort of a closed platform where you know that you are in. And in these kind of maybe more retail-oriented platforms or consumer-oriented type of platforms, I need to say it might not be always very clear that I'm actually in a platform and that I'm actually putting all my eggs in the same basket, including my data and everything related to that. So for this, given the time, I would like to thank Professor Verhetzel, Professor De Wulf, and Professor Gevaars for your interesting and very challenging contributions to the webinar. I would like to thank all the people in the webinar for being here, for sharing your thoughts with us. And there will be, not all the slides will be shared, but we will be sharing a selection of the slides to you in the coming week. And if you need more information or you would like to have more discussions, please do reach out to us, and we will be very happy to spend time on your point and to actually move the discussion further that we can do in this online type of environment. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I hope to see you soon in 3D rather than in 2D. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Good night, everyone. Yeah. Thanks, Tom, for moderating.
Thanks.